Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. We're going to be talking about mutant coronavirus strain. Obviously, we ain't doing that on YouTube. Too crazy, too WHO adverse. We also got on this show a fantastic guest. Dr. Drew Pinsky is with us, and we're going to be talking about, this is my favorite bit of the whole conversation. We're going to be talking about how he went from being an admirer, an adherent to Anthony Fauci, because they worked together, get this, around the AIDS pandemic, to being deeply cynical and suspicious of Fauci. This is a brilliant conversation. It's an education. You are going to love it. Of course, we're on YouTube. We love you, you Awaken Wonders, for the first 15 minutes, then freely on Rumble, where the speech might stream without impediment, without prohibition. And of course, you'll be told that it's actually hate speech that we're interested in conveying. Nothing could be further from the truth. As usual, the Orwellian language inversion is taking place. When we talk about love, when we talk about bringing people together, when we talk about inspiring your independent individual sovereignty, when we talk about control of your communities, when we talk about your right to be whoever you are, they consider that hate speech. Why? Because that brings us together to create the one force that can stop this globalist, elitist project. Unity among the people. Decentralized, that means we have control over our own lives, but unified in opposition to them. The first part of the show will be available on YouTube. Then download the app, will ya? Download the Rumble app, then you'll know every time we're broadcasting. And if you want to support our work and get additional content every single week, like this week we did a brilliant report, if I may say so. I don't do all the work, there's a brilliant team of people working here, on the agricultural protests. We got Vandana Shiva's views on why these agricultural protests are happening and how your food sovereignty relates to your freedom. It's kind of obvious. Why are there spontaneously protests all over the world? You are not going to want to miss this video. In fact, have a look at it. I don't think them farmers are all there at the Brandenburg Gate going, do you know what I'm sick and tired of? Dual-use toilets. You know, it's like they're trying to make it about the culture, because I think most people do respect the legitimacy of people to be different religions and culture. And I think most people are cool with that. What the issue is inequality and the oppression and annihilation of working people across the world because of the advance of automation and the requirement for totalitarian control. I think that's what it is, isn't it? Time now to get right into it. We'll let you watch the first part of our conversation, you wonderful people of YouTube, but this is a medical physician who's got strong views on a variety of subjects, including Anthony Fauci, so we won't be able to do the whole thing. You'll probably know Dr. Drew because he's been in media for years. He's a board-certified physician and legacy celebrity talent with over 35 years of national radio, New York Times best-selling books, and countless telly shows bearing his name. You can check out his work at drdrew.com. Plus, he's on Rumble streaming with his show, Ask Dr. Drew. Now, let's get into our conversation. Dr. Drew, thanks for joining us.
It's great to see you, sir. And as we were just starting to mention before the mics heated up, we were together a few years ago. We did a speech together about recovery. And as I think about our last meeting and then this one, many roads have been traveled. It's like, would you have imagined the world would evolve the way it has?
No, and the only people that did imagine it were kind of peripheral, zealous, fringe evangelists that were at the time regarded as conspiracy theorists. I always felt that in our conversations before, because we're talking about medicine, we were talking about mental health, we were talking about addiction and wellness. Yep. I know that in our previous conversations, we would have touched on the social implications of a condition like addiction, that addiction is somewhat related to social pressures. We may even have got as far as saying that the pharmaceutical industry possibly exploits addiction. We may not have been in a position to talk about Purdue and Big Pharma and the Sackler family and the way that the opioid crisis has been handled. But, I know that's the kind of thing we would have touched on before. But as you say, we're in a very different territory now. From your perspective, Doc, what lines have been crossed and how is it we've found ourselves here?
Well, so I've become a student of history because of this, and much to my shock. But I think I want to answer that two ways that are a little bit glib and a little bit just so. One is post-structuralism has taken hold in this country in particular in a way that has been destructive. The idea of truth has been undermined, and the reality is there is a truth, and one of our goals should be to ascend to some approximation of truth. We've forsaken that, and that has bled into science and everything. So that's a problem. Number two, that's the sort of historical sort of note. But number two, you mentioned the Sackler family and the excesses of the opioid industry. But the real perpetrators of the opioid crisis were evangelical physicians. In this country and in the UK as well, pain medicine became this cudgel that went around and forced physicians, sound familiar now, forced physicians to make pain the fifth vital sign. Pain was more important. There should be no pain ever, to the point where 90% of the Vicodin prescribed in the world was prescribed in this country. That was not the drug company. That was me and my peers, not me. That was my peers. And evangelical physicians are dangerous. Fast forward to COVID. In this country, we have a Deborah Birx who evangelizes for lockdowns. An evangelical physician went state to state, governor to governor, and persuaded, frightened these governors that they didn't lock down, they'd be killing people. Same phenomenon, same playbook, same disaster.
It's interesting that we're talking about two really subjects that both of which I'm fascinated by: the impact of post-structuralism and relativism, the idea that there perhaps is that there's a degree of ambiguity. And look, I'm sympathetic to the idea that there are institutions that have been deemed just and granted authority that could benefit from open-ended analysis. These are some of the areas of post-structuralism, not necessarily talking about semiotics and the semantic component of that, but certainly looking at power from an open-minded perspective. But also the idea that when you say evangelical physicians, it shows that there's a sort of component to prescribing medicine and issuing medical care that is emotional rather than practical. And the whole
these days, for sure, for sure, not only emotional but also social. Because now we are having these movements in medicine where people are, I was a scientist, I was a clinician, and the idea that we have social movements within medicine and focusing on things that are away. I mean, it's good that we're paying attention to these things, but that those are sweeping us away from science is really very, very concerning.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, and I don't know how or why that's happened, because the post-structuralist idea, does that lead to the over-emotionalization of everything? Or I would have thought that it was quite an academic, quite cold, atheistic, materialistic, rationalistic ideology. And yet what we are talking about now is a type of hysteria within the medical profession.
But the hysteria was, the world, much to my amazement, seemed to have been prone to this hysteria. You're absolutely right. So now, again, I was giving you just so things that came to mind when you asked your initial question. My other sort of frame is, and I know you'll agree with this, is we've had, particularly again in this country, a narcissistic turn. The general trait structure of our personalities have gone towards what's called cluster B, borderline sociopath, narcissist. And I'd not seen a lot of histrionic, but it was waiting in the background, clearly, with the hysterias right on the heels of it. And I can go on and on. I wrote a book about that 20 years ago, and it's something I can talk a great deal about. I saw it coming. I predicted. And I knew that the liability of narcissism is scapegoating. I knew there would be scapegoating, and I knew there would be moms. And man, I didn't know it would look like this, though.
Do you think that this narcissism and this emergence of kind of pathological conditions that would have before been regarded as extraordinary and maybe even rare, and certainly as problems, it sounds like you're saying they've become normalized. Is this because of individualism? What do you mean by that everyone's become borderline sociopaths?
So I'll tell you where I noticed it. I worked in I'm an internist, but I worked in a psychiatric hospital for 35 years. I ran their addiction services for 20 while I was practicing general medicine in a hospital, an outpatient setting. I've been 40 years in medicine. And in the early mid 80s, when I first started working at the psychiatric hospital, I would look at all the admitting forms, patients coming in, and I would see there was always a window where we put in the personality diagnoses. And the psychiatrist would put in I saw all kinds of things: dependent personalities and obsessive compulsive, all the full spectrum of the A, B, and C disorders that you find in the DSM-5. I noticed toward the end of the 80s, all of a sudden I was seeing in the female predominantly borderline. And by the 1990s, only cluster B. That's all we admitted were cluster B patients. And I thought at the time, if you remember, I did a radio show back then, and I was talking to people, by the hundreds every night, and all I was hearing about was childhood trauma, childhood trauma, childhood trauma. And the outcome of childhood trauma is commonly a cluster B personality, at least trait, if not disorder.
Just to reiterate, because so that I understand properly, cluster B. Could you just tell me what the indicators are again?
That's the borderline narcissist, sociopath, and histrionic. Those are the cluster B disorders. They're considered the narcissistic disorders. And so having seen that evolution, I wrote a book in the probably 2000, I don't know what it was, 8 or 10 or something, where we actually did personality inventories on celebrities, because I started seeing that they were really struggling with this stuff, a lot of trauma. You're shaking your head. And of course, we documented that they had a higher incidence of narcissistic traits than other populations. And even our control population, we used our control population was business school students, and they were above previously documented average. It was very clear. Everything was moving that direction. And it was all childhood trauma. That's the underpinning issue. And as you know, as we used to discuss, one of the rocket fuels for addiction is trauma.
So do you think that there's been a greater increase in trauma or a tendency to diagnose trauma? What are the prevailing ambient factors that have caused this phenomenon?
So it took until the 2000s for my profession to go, oh, adverse childhood experiences affect people's mental health and health. Amazing. Isn't that amazing? So they developed the ACE scale. What is on the ACE scale, which are adverse childhood experience scale, things like divorce, domestic abuse, somebody in the family in prison, somebody using substances. And if you have more than 2 of those, and of course, overt trauma and all those sorts of things we would think of as trauma. But in this world where families are decayed, where people are using substances, where there's a lot of violence and aggression, who isn't exposed to that? It's extremely common to be exposed to adverse childhood experience. And then add to that screens. We have no idea how that's amplifying everything and what they're being exposed to there, whether that's an independent trauma. So here we go. I mean, it is on. And of course, it's happening more than ever. The only period of history that I could find similar experiences of that kind of abandonment, neglect, and abuse of kids was pre-revolutionary France. And I wanted to write a chapter in my book about that. And I was told by the editor it was too speculative. I said, look, there's going to be, I just don't know. There's going to be guillotines. There's going to be mobs. That's what narcissists do. They have so much unregulated aggression. They have to form mobs and focus it on somebody else. And here we are now. Cancellation, everybody. Welcome to our world.
So if you have a culture that fetishizes the individual, that is histrionic and narcissistic, sociopathic, the characteristics that you laid out, one of the symptoms when that becomes ubiquitous is the emergence of scapegoating. It has to, the sort of culture of the society requires it. And you say in revolutionary France, obviously with the guillotine, practice that in a visible, demonstrable, and dramatic way. But you're saying that our culture is bearing those signs also. If something's happening at that scale, it can't be moving up through individuals, can it, Doctor? There must be some sort of central social factor.
Well, I haven't thought about it that way. What do you, it's an interesting question. You mean like somebody taking advantage of that and sort of amplifying it or manipulating it in some way?
It means, for me, my sense is that, whether there was a radical increase in addiction, you think, well, why would that be? Is there the availability of substances? Is there economic inequality? Is there increased poverty? What are the social factors that likely lead to epidemic proportions being reached? And I feel that you indicated at the beginning that the values of the culture have shifted, and I feel that that's true also on some level, and it's a difficult thing to entirely articulate. Some people in our chat are saying the breakdown of the family, and I feel like we have lost our connection with God. I feel that our values have become narcissistic, that even identity politics, and I'm sympathetic to the civil rights movements around each of the categories, but what I sense is that the individual has become the sort of apex of value, that what you are as a person and what you feel and what you want is the kind of summit of the social values, rather than who we are as a member of a community, who we are as a member of a movement, or even a nation or a religion. Yeah, I feel that plays a part somehow.
Yes, there's no doubt, right? I mean, what are the first couple of steps of recovery from a substance use, which is letting go, not controlling everything, which means, as many of my patients say, they feel like they're a piece of ass around which the whole world revolves. That needs to let go. You need to let go of being in. No, 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 no. You're not the center of the universe. And then for people to do that fully, they have to have some sort of concept of faith, something. I don't care. I don't know what that is for everybody. It's kind of magical to me to some extent, but I know that it's necessary for people to fully let go of their self-centric, whether it's white-centric or Eurocentric or whatever centric it is. They have to let go. They have to let go and be open to what the world has. Now, doing that it sounds just so. It sounds like everyone should be able to do that. It isn't easy. It's not easy to do that, really. And to find some sort of spiritual something, it's hard for people, but I do think we miss it badly. I've been saying there's a spiritual malady for 20 years. You have too. The last time we were together, that's one of the things we sort of agreed upon with clarity, that there's something up. How we fill that emptiness, I don't to me, that I don't claim to be the carrier of that information, but I do know we need to solve it.
Yeah, you're right. Because, of course, we were talking before about addiction, and you were kind
Yeah.
enough to help me with my book, Recovery, I remember. And I went on your radio show or podcast. I can't remember what medium was flourishing at that time. But I do know that when we did the
It
live event together, you,
was books.
yeah, yeah, it was a print. And we were talking
Yeah.
about, like, you agreed with my interpretation of the 12
Mm.
steps is about having, as you've just described, a spiritual awakening and the support of a community, and ultimately being able to overcome the inclination towards a type of self-centeredness that you're describing in your cluster B diagnosis there.
I want to interrupt you because I left out one thing that I was going to comment on your last construct of how you were describing the lack of connection. Lack of connection is really what you're talking about. Lack of connection to other, lack of connection to community, lack of connection to God, lack of connection to self. Frankly, we are disconnected. And guess what trauma does? It disintegrates us, disconnects us. But I want to make one more comment, because I think people will assail us for saying people aren't connected to their community. There is a phenomenon afoot right now I call grandiose caring, which is still the narcissism. I care so much about this group and that. I care. I don't care what you care about. If you actually care about somebody, develop a skill, develop some sort of wisdom, and go and offer it to another person. A person. Don't stand on the stage and beat your chest and gnash your teeth. That is grandiose caring. That is narcissism. I'm glad you care. I want you to care about other people, but that is not going to help the present moment.
Yeah, in Christianity, I note that it's significant to do God's work privately and quietly and with humility, so that it doesn't become performative. And I guess a component of the scapegoating has become something that's often discussed: virtue performed publicly, the appearance of morality. And I was thinking about the
Yes.
culture at the moment. I was thinking, how are people getting it up, Dr. Drew, to talk about the Oscars or the Golden Globes when there is this immersive sense, that we are in some kind of crisis? I was sort of fascinated to hear your diagnosis, because it's one that I agree with. Because continually, from from this odd globalist humanitarian perspective, people will continually cite confident statistics around, well, do you know more people have been pulled out of poverty than ever before, and the standard of living this and this is better than ever. And I always feel, well, I don't know that that's the reality a lot of people are living in. It feels like we're in a highly precipitous and dangerous moment, in a massive crisis of meaning, and this kind of shared psychopathy seems relevant.
Crisis of meaning. Yes. What does it mean to live a good life? And it may well be that these measures, these instruments that we measure economic well-being and, people being pulled out of poverty, all that stuff you just referenced, is not relevant to the crisis of the present. I mean, it's always relevant. Let's be fair. People need to be safe. They need to be able to, but they need to be able to thrive. If you don't get people, if people are in pain, they can't thrive. Let's just state it such. But the reality of the present moment may be something different. Spiritual crisis, lack of meaning. What does it mean to lead a good life? What does that mean? And when I say it, people, and again, I only have this country, I'm deeply embedded here, so I have this as my reference point. They confuse a good life with happiness, and hedonic happiness, I'm sure you study Schopenhauer. So you go from happy to wanting more happiness to happy to wanting more. Hedonic happiness is a dead end street. It's nice, it's good, but eudaimonic happiness, as Aristotle called it, is something that's much more nourishing and is the source of a good life. So we have to each of us figure out what that meaning is for us. And there's some, people have thought about that for thousands of years, and there are people that have suggested certain things. We might return to some of that stuff, perhaps.
Yeah, the inward generation of joy compared to the external application of pleasure is a confusion that seems to have been with us some time. I was chatting to someone about Epicureanism. The sort of like Epicurus was kind of got associated with pleasure seeking, but someone explained to me recently, no, he wasn't about pleasure, he was about joy. And when we start talking about pleasure over joy and transient happiness, which is easily commodified, it's very distinct from the generation of independent joy coming from within, joy in your nature.
But you said independent joy. I'm of the opinion, and I may be wrong about this, but I've always noticed that real joy tends to be a shared experience. It's something that people have together, or at least it's amplified in such a way that it becomes more substantial when it is experienced with at least an other, if not many others.
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment. Although, like sometimes when I think of someone like Yogananda, like he's talking about there being an ever-present bliss that we're blocked off from because of layers of samskara and layers of injury. And I try sometimes to contemplate what's meant by the kingdom of heaven being within. So there's no doubt. Like I don't want to sort of double down on the kind of individualism that you and I are both decrying, and I reckon that there's a certain joy that can be derived from relationship and service, but the idea that what I'm trying to establish and explain is that as a recovering addict, the idea that pleasure is going to come from the outside, whether it's like through sex or through food or through heroin or alcohol, that I can consume somehow pleasure rather than through service and good conduct, through right conduct, joy will be generated as a byproduct rather than as the aim.
Isn't right conduct something that is in short supply also? Kant's first principles. I always think it's kind of amusing. I mean, his first principle was, of course, that behave as though your behavior can be judged as universal principle, which is essentially another way of saying behave in such a way that people can see all your choices, as though there's a camera going at all times. Yeah. And guess what, everybody? Now there is a camera going at all times, so you are going to be judged. So you might as well fall in line.
Okay, before you answer the next question, Doctor, I have to tell our beloved viewers on YouTube, we need you to join us. We need you to be a part of this movement because we're going to discuss stuff that would be contraband on a WHO platform, on a platform that listens to the British government when they say demonetize Russell Brand. This is part of our movement. We need you with us right now. We're going to be talking about Dr. Drew's views on Joe Rogan and the COVID protocol that he espoused and why the legacy media responded the way they did with that massive pylon. Isn't it weird when the whole media responds with one voice as if there is one agenda to amplify and normalize the power, the agenda of the powerful. We're talking about Fauci, we're talking about excess deaths, all sorts of stuff we wouldn't be able to do on YouTube. So click the link in the description and join us there. And please, see you in a second, consider becoming a supporter of our content, becoming an Awaken Wonder to get an additional video every single week. Brilliant ones on excess deaths, on farmer protests, and more importantly, perhaps support our work so we can grow together.